This is a screenshot video about the posting for weeks 11 to 12, defense of justification, and we'll go through what I consider to be the significant points of the defense. I would want to point out to you in the posting that we're looking at, if we go to page 3, there's a handy, I think it's handy, table. I guess you would call this a table, where what I've tried to do is look at defensive persons, look at defensive property, look at the categories of physical force and deadly physical force, and point out in a very general way what the New York rules are regarding the defense of justification. Now, one thing I am not doing in the defense is I'm not talking about the rules that regard the use of physical force and deadly physical force by law enforcement personnel. Clearly, as I am thinking about the George Floyd murder trial, I'm very much aware of the political and social importance of the use of force and deadly physical force by law enforcement personnel. I consider that, as I suspect all of you do, no matter your political persuasion, to be a very important topic. The reason I'm not, if you will, getting into it is that I want to consider this course from the perspective of either a prosecutor, but more significantly a criminal defense attorney. And it's more often than not the conduct of private individuals as opposed to law enforcement personnel that we're looking at. I encourage you, however, to take a look at the sections in Article 35 of the New York Penal Law, which deal with the justifiable uses of physical force and deadly physical force, and consider the rules as they relate to law enforcement. Again, I'm not unaware of how important these matters are across the board. I know in Buffalo last summer, then I'm going to get off of it, I was scrolling through something on my iPad, and the next thing I knew, may have been Twitter, but there was a stream of what happened in Niagara Square when there was a large protest going on, and the police were seeking to clear the square, and an older gentleman, we old guys like to say that, older gentleman, can be seen running up to the police, and then he ends up on the ground and unfortunately sustains a rather significant injury to his head. And by the way, I just have to add this. What the cops were doing was a sweep. And believe it or not, I learned that kind of technique in Fort Gordon, Georgia in the spring of 1969. To give away my age a little bit, I had been drafted, emphasize drafted, and in its infinite wisdom, the Army sent me to MP school, and back in 1969, there were a lot of protests going on because of the fiasco war in Vietnam, and crowd control was a big law enforcement technique for the Army when people were marching on the Pentagon and so on. Different kinds of marches, by the way, not armed insurrection as we saw in January. But in any event, what then goes on is we learn different sweeps, and that was a law enforcement technique that I think the Buffalo police were engaged in downtown. And I'm not going to say anything further about it, but I understood both perspectives. I think there's two perspectives to have about that one particular incident. But we're going to look at the justifiable uses of physical force and deadly physical force as it pertains to private individuals. And what we see is that we have to draw the distinction between physical force and deadly physical force. And the distinction turns on really what the definition of deadly physical force is. And it's physical force which, under the circumstances in which it is used, is readily capable of causing death or other serious physical injury. We have a definition of serious physical injury. And then what we could say is, in view of the definition of deadly physical force and serious physical injury, we can define physical force as any amount of physical force that does not rise to the level of deadly physical force. What we would want to be aware of is that the definition of deadly physical force includes the language, the circumstances in which the force is used. And as I point out, there may be times when physical force is used under circumstances where not a lot of physical force can is readily capable of causing death or other serious physical injury. So if A shoves B lightly in the back, most of the time we would think that's just the application of physical force. However, if B is standing at the edge of the Grand Canyon when A shoves him lightly in the back, then clearly under the circumstances in which it is used, A's physical force is deadly physical force. Now we have next the table, and as I point out, when we look at the table, we want to make certain that we're aware of the text that follows. Before we go on, however, you'll notice that there's in the lower right-hand corner of the table, we've left blank the circumstances when deadly physical force could be used in defense of property. And what I'm going to say is this. We being in the United States, we pay at least lip service to the notion that life is more important than property. I don't know how that works on the ground all the time, but the thought would be that deadly physical force should never be permitted to be used in defense of property. And what we're going to see is, and let me just jump up, you could say, well, burglary is an offense against property because to burglarize my house means that you enter it without my consent. And clearly that's a crime, you would say, against property. And probably the accompanying intent to enter is to steal something. So why am I not considering burglary a crime against property, at least if it's a dwelling or occupied building? And I would ask you to imagine this, that in the middle of the night, you hear a sound in your living room under circumstances where you are absolutely convinced that that sound isn't being made by anybody who should be in your apartment or in your house or whatever, right? And I'm going to ask you, what are your feelings at that time? Are your feelings that you're concerned about some of the property in the living room? And my observation is no. Your feelings are going to be based on your concern for the safety and well-being of yourself and other people who should be and indeed are in the residence. And what I'm suggesting then, that if we have a dwelling or an occupied building and a burglary, we are worried more than just about property. We're worried about people. And our worry, I think, is a substantial one, because if in the middle of the night, so to speak, tomorrow morning, I hear someone down in my living room, and I make a quick inventory, and everybody who should be in the house is there in their bedrooms upstairs, I'm worried about their well-being and my well-being. Now, let's assume that I tiptoe down the stairs and look over the railing, and there's a complete stranger in my living room. And I'm going to suggest that at that point in time, again, there's more than the sanctity of my property that's at stake. My well-being is at stake. And my guess is if I have a gun, I don't have one, but if I had a gun, and certainly in my possession, I don't think what I'm going to do at that point is say to that person, hey, you better leave or I'm going to shoot you, because what that person could do is shoot me first. But in those circumstances, we're worried about people. And so you could do the same with an arson, and we'll talk about the forcible rape and so on. So, but crimes against property per se, so this will be my last little thought here on this blank space. Let's assume you now have the vehicle of your dreams. Many people don't have vehicle of their dreams, but I've known quite a few who do. And so it's out there in your driveway. You've driven it off the lot and lost thousands of dollars worth of value because you did that. But now it's in your driveway, and you're looking out the window just admiring the vehicle of your dreams. Maybe it's an Escalade. Maybe it's the coolest pickup truck you've ever seen. I don't know what moves you in that regard. And you see a stranger walk up your driveway and start to key your brand new vehicle of your dreams. You cannot use deadly physical force to prevent that person from doing that. And this is what we're talking about with this blank square on this table. So let's now focus on defensive person's physical force. And we're going to see a couple of different things in play that if we take note of it now for physical force, we can apply it with equal accuracy for the rest of the categories. And what I'm getting at is the asterisk. And the asterisk is tied into reasonable perception and reasonably necessary. So let's walk it through. I can use physical force in defense of myself, or you, a third person, if I have reason to believe someone is using or about to use unlawful physical force, and if my reasonable force is reasonably necessary, if my physical force is reasonably necessary. So built into this, and now I'm going to refer to something we've done earlier this semester, mistake of fact. Built into this is the possibility I may be mistaken, which is to say, and I'm going to give you an example, which is to say that someone had a reasonable perception, but in fact they were mistaken. Then we could have a mistake of fact. So here's an example. Years and years ago, I was driving home from work in Buffalo. I was an attorney, and the office I worked in did a lot of criminal defense. And there was a client of the office who was known as an enforcer. for the individuals who employed him. Very big man, very nimble, and